Okay, hi, I'm Mr. Simons, and here we are with the second part of our look at the strategies in human resource management. So in a previous video, I have looked at the first 4 in this list, and I will link to that in the show notes. What we're going to do in terms of this video is we're going to look at the next 4. This is taken from the syllabus, which is put out by NESA, and I'll put a link to that in the description as well. So in this, we're very much looking at the HR topic, and we are there in terms of the strategies section. So if you recall, roles, influence, process, strategies, that's where we are. And we know for HR, there is also the effectiveness, but we'll look at that in a future video. So let's get stuck into this. So in terms of where we're starting with strategies, our first strategy is performance management, and that the syllabus divides it up into developmental and administrative. So if we think about how are we going to define performance management, what do we mean by that? That a way of explaining it would be, so this is really about how a business manages and evaluates employee performance. So evaluates here, yes, part of it is making a judgment on the success or otherwise of an employee in terms of their role. And that why are we doing this? What is the point here? So the goal of performance management is very much about improving business performance. That we're looking at the employee first, what is their performance like, in order to then improve business performance. That's how we would consider this. In terms of how we approach it, that there are 2 different models we look at. The first model being the developmental model, and that here I like to think about it that we start with the individual, with the employee. There is also the administrative model, and there we start with the business. So what we're doing in this developmental model, this first part here, so our purpose is very much on that develop angle. But what we are saying is we're looking at the individual employees and we are saying, how can we improve their skills and abilities? And that in terms of what we would be looking at with that, we would be thinking about how can we fix employees' weaknesses? How can we increase their effectiveness in their jobs? And how could we also prepare them for promotions to take on more responsibility in the business? So that these, or sort of the origin for this, that we really are talking about, okay, so with the developmental model, we are sitting down and we are having discussions with the individual. And this could be yearly, this could be quarterly, this could be more often. And that what we are trying to do with this process, and I'll just zoom out a little bit and come over here, that with the developmental model, we are trying to, and let's put this extra word here, we are trying to promptly identify and correct poor performance. Because if we're not paying attention to individual employees and they're doing a bad job over the course of the year or even more, then that could be a real negative for the business. The other reason that this developmental model is used is that it can help retain staff, so that if we are working to prepare people for promotions and increase their responsibility, then staff might be more willing to stick around with the business so that they can take advantage of those opportunities. So if we're thinking about what these points represent here, that these are the benefits of taking a developmental approach here, of applying the developmental model. So let's move on to the administrative model. So here, rather than starting with the individual, our focus is first on the business. Let's zoom in a little bit here. So we're going to start with the business. So our kind of first question, so we're asking the question, is the business achieving its goals in terms of the sort of overall HR function? And so then we can think about, okay, well, if it is, yes, well then, great, nothing to do, everything's super terrific, but that is very unlikely, right? that it is much more likely that in some circumstance or some particular area that the business is not achieving all of its goals. So that what we can do with this administrative model is that if we can see that it's not achieving its goals, what we can do is we can use this to identify areas for improvement, particularly in terms of what can we do with HR to fix it. So do we need to train people? So again, we've answered this question by saying no. So then we're saying, okay, with this administrative model, we're asking this question, and we're looking at ways that HR can help us achieve our goals and overcome this no in this situation. The other thing that we can do with this administrative model is that it also is asking us to think about, we can also think about, are the individual and business goals aligned? Because if we look at it here in this first part, we are very much looking at, okay, what are the individual's goals? And then here we're very much looking at what are the business's goals. So the administrative model then allows us to take a look and say, okay, are these two sets of goals aligned? Can they work together? And that if so, what are the kind of things we can put in place to further improve those things? So remember, we're talking about this administrative model. We'll zoom out a little bit so we can see it all together. That what we're saying here is that the benefits of applying this administrative model, so we'll put this little asterisk, double asterisk here, can put that over here. So we're saying, okay, so what are the benefits of having this administrative model where we are looking at the whole business and we are saying, are we achieving our goals? What are the HR strategies that we need to put in place to try and change things? Well, benefits are, if we identify areas for improvement and then we actually improve those areas, then we could improve financial performance. That's a good outcome. The other thing is that we could also work on or address other elements of the organisation, strengths, weaknesses in the business, because we're asking those questions more broadly about the business. So just to clarify this, if we improve on those areas, so that's kind of like one, then step two, we can improve financial performance. Also, by applying this administrative model and improving those areas, we could then address the strengths and weaknesses of HR in the business and try and fix things that aren't working very well. Second HR strategy here is looking at in terms of rewards. And we've got here monetary and non-monetary rewards. So if we are breaking this down as the starting point, so monetary rewards are things like pay or rewards that have financial value. If we focus on non-monetary rewards, so no financial value in terms of that. If we go a little bit further in terms of this, we can talk about kind of the textbook, and I'll link to it in the show notes, sort of separates it between direct and indirect monetary rewards. So direct being things that kind of go straight to you. So you're, in terms of indirect things that have a financial value, maybe that the business will cover things like the health insurance, so it has a financial value, but it's not going, the money isn't going straight into your pocket. Maybe extra leave, again, that's worth money, but the money isn't coming to you, the leave is. Maybe there's some kind of subsidized or even free childcare. So all of that has a financial value, but the money doesn't go into your pocket. So that is the monetary reward side of things. And then we've got the non-monetary reward. So that the way that the textbook divides it up, which I think is useful, is that you can think about the non-monetary rewards that are present in the job and as part of your day-to-day job, and the non-monetary rewards that are part of the business environment. So the environment of the particular business. And this might become clearer. Well, it hopefully will become clearer as we go through it. So here, things that are great about the job specifically is that maybe the work is very engaging or interesting. Maybe you have been given a nice position of responsibility, and maybe that there are lots of opportunities for promotion. +2, develop your skills and learn new skills as well. In terms of the overall environment of the business or the company, that maybe there are nice perks in terms of like maybe there are free meals, right? Maybe there is a very supportive HR department. We could also potentially talk about the fact that there is a really nice work environment. Look, I think that free meals could probably sit in here maybe. Depends. I don't think it's a huge distinction between those two, but I think that the meals and all things are very much part of the workplace environment. Still, the key thing that is, okay, monetary rewards, pay, they have financial value. Non-monetary, they don't really have financial value, but they're still important to people because it is still a strategy here in order to attract employees. And maybe that's worth putting down over here, is that we can say that, you know, these two things here, that both of those are important in attracting employees. It's not just about how much people get paid. So let's dig a bit deeper here so that we can also then distinguish in terms of rewards. So we've very much got, okay, so monetary, non-monetary. We can now focus on individual and group rewards too. So we are rewarding the individual and not the team as a whole. One way of rewarding individuals for their performance is, well, through performance pay. And basically it's kind of how it sounds, right? Is that the better you perform, the stronger your performance, that the higher you will be paid, and this could include bonuses as well. So the stronger you perform, the more money, the more reward you will get. So the challenge with this though is that when we are basing someone on performance, that the question is that how do we measure someone's performance? Is it purely about how many sales they make? Is it about their kind of ratings on customer service? Maybe we get customers to fill out feedback forms. How is it done? Because it's challenging sometimes to have objective measures about an individual's performance. It's difficult to have an objective measure that clearly shows, okay, this person has done better than others. So let's then think about our group rewards situation, so that rather than rewarding the individual, we reward the team. The business or the team, that they encounter success. So maybe there's an increase in sales, maybe costs fall, etc. And so what we do is we pretty much reward everyone. And we might reward everyone in terms of maybe everyone in the whole business gets a reward, or maybe just the team there gets the reward. And so what we are saying though with this process is that everyone for the whole business, or many people for the team, so many people or everyone share in the rewards. And so that this is very much the concept of gain sharing, that those gains across the business are shared with the members of the business. The issue that we can experience with this, which you may have experienced with group assignments, is that all individuals don't contribute equally. Some work harder than others, and they might get frustrated because everyone or many people are getting the rewards even though they didn't work harder. So we can get a sense of jealousy. Maybe jealousy is not the best word. We can definitely get a sense of frustration. And maybe even in terms of people getting annoyed, being like, well, they're not working as hard as I am, but they're still getting benefit, is that maybe morale falls, but also maybe everyone just been like, well, I'm going to get rewarded anyway, so why would I put in more effort? If everyone's going to get a reward, why am I going to work harder? So that can be a challenge that is experienced with those individual rewards. Our next HR strategy is about global HR strategies. So it's kind of thinking about that what we are doing is we are trying to expand. So we are looking to expand the HR function to include partners, providers, and workers who are based overseas. So if we're talking about an Australian company, we're not just thinking about HR in a narrow sense of operating in Australia. We are actually looking at the global supply chain and we're seeing who can help us with our HR function. Maybe that's a nice thing to put down. We're asking here and we're saying who globally can help with HR. And that there's a couple of reasons why this is important for a business. So if we think about it, there are costs, skills, and supply. So let's just take them in turn. So if we think about costs, so Australia has relatively high labour costs. So what a business can do is that they can offshore, and that what they're doing is we're going to send jobs overseas to markets in which wages are cheaper. So we're paying out less in wages, or we're actually going to set up businesses overseas to again take advantage of lower wages. So we're saying here in terms of that less money is its lower wages. And that we are looking at kind of relocating or moving some of those operations to take advantage of lower labour costs. So we'll just put that here, that we're saying here in terms of costs that we are trying to move parts of the business to take advantage of lower labour costs. And that part of that is relevant because Australia is known for its relatively high labour costs. So we're not getting into like the sort of pros and cons of this strategy, we're just saying that this is an HR strategy to try and address costs. The other thing we can think about is in terms of skills. And what we're saying here is that, Australia doesn't have access to certain skilled employees, that when companies look around Australia, that there is an absence of certain skills. So that we don't have sufficient workers that have the skills that are needed for particular jobs. So then what we're saying is that, okay, so a business can then source these workers globally. So we can increase the pool of workers that have the needed skills. So it's just saying that we don't have to be limited by a lack of skills locally. So costs, that's about high costs. Skills here, we're talking about a lack of skills. In terms of supply, we're talking about the numbers, right? So we're saying here that maybe that Australia or businesses are experiencing a shortage of workers. So that in this case, that the demand for workers would exceed the supply. So that this here would create a situation of a skills shortage in terms of not being able to find the necessary number of workers. Now, clearly there is a connection between these two things, between skills and supply, because we are very much looking for the right number of skilled workers, but we can think about them in a slightly different way. So when we've got this idea of a skills shortage, well, the solution is quite similar to, is what we're going to do is we're going to look to skilled migrants. So we're going to use that global HR strategy of sourcing workers globally, sourcing extra workers from global markets. So if we zoom out for a minute, so that here we're talking very much about, okay, so these are global HR strategies, and that, as we said at the start here, we're saying who globally can help us deal with HR issues in terms of costs of workers, access to the right skills, access to the right number of workers. So if we're starting from the start, I'm starting from a point here, so if we are talking about this idea of an industrial dispute, and this very much sits at the heart of what we are talking about here, so the industrial dispute relates to a conflict between employer and the employees. And this can be over a number of different things, but typical conflicts are over things like wages, working conditions, safety. Here we're talking about WH&S, workplace health and safety. As part of an industrial dispute, we can also look at this idea of grievance procedures. So these are internal business policies, internal procedures that are there to deal with conflicts. So what we are trying to do with this process, a business is trying to deal with it internally through the organisation, not looking to other people. So if we think about it as kind of like 4 steps, and that we are, let's say we start here at this first step and it goes down this way. Let's make that a little bit. As we are moving down this table, that we are sort of going into sort of increasingly serious, it is becoming increasingly formal. We start with negotiation. So if we are talking about negotiation, that what we are saying here is that, so this is an internal process, internal to the business, and the parties who are in disagreement are attempting to solve the issue themselves. So that this is here where we see the impact of the grievance procedures. So here we get a conflict between 2 workers, maybe between a worker and a boss, maybe between workers and the business itself, and that the business is saying, okay, let's try and sort this out ourselves. Let us implement our grievance procedures and try and find a resolution. So what we're trying to do here is, can we find a resolution for all parties? Okay, so if this doesn't succeed, if this doesn't work, what we then go is from negotiation, we'll have to go to mediation. If negotiation is successful, then that's the end of the story. If negotiation fails, we have to go to the next step, which is mediation. So mediation is still informal, it's voluntary, so that I should just put here that both of these steps, so this is informal and voluntary, and so is negotiation. That what is happening though is, rather than just being internal, when we go to mediation, we are getting a third party mediator, and a third party in the sense that this person here is independent. So they don't work for the business, they're from elsewhere, and we're trying to find a resolution. So we were unsuccessful at solving it amongst ourselves. Now we're bringing out an independent external person to try for the resolution, to see if this can work. So if this works, great. If not, we have to move on to the next step. So what we're doing is now we're getting more into the formal side. So if we look at steps 3 and 4 here, so if we say, okay, steps 3 and 4, that here we are getting into the formal side of trying to resolve a dispute, because both conciliation and arbitration here will take place through the Fair Work Commission. So that what we are starting to see with these 2 points is that we are getting the involvement of courts and tribunals now. It's no longer internal, it's no longer bringing along just an independent third party. Now we actually have the courts and tribunals involved to try and solve this dispute, because we've been unsuccessful so far. So if we're looking at conciliation, it is very similar to mediation. So we are still trying to get a resolution, and we still have the involvement of a mediator. Compromise. Can we work together to find a resolution, now being part of the formal system, now being part of the Fair Work Commission, trying to find a solution? An outcome is not going to be imposed during the conciliation stage. It's still very much up to the parties who are disputing to try and find a solution. The difference occurs if we then have a situation where conciliation fails and then we actually have to get to arbitration. Now this is very serious because there is a legally binding decision that is then imposed on parties. So whatever the decision is, whether people like it or not, all parties, they must abide by it. They must follow it. It's really much here is a last resort. It would be much better if parties often can find their own solutions. So the key part here is that whatever the Fair Work Commission finds here, whatever they decide, it is legally binding, it is imposed on all parties, and everyone has to follow it. You get your winner and you get your loser. Okay, so that was our discussion of part 2 of the HR strategies. The links to the first part will be in the description. Any questions, comments, put them in the comments. Please like it if it's valuable in any way, and I will see you in the next one.